An entitled old Karen pretends like she's gonna rob me as I'm trying to change out the money for an ATM machine. And despite the fact that she tried to claim it was a joke, I decided to jump into action as I turned around and judo flipped her onto the ground as hard as I could, resulting in the cops getting called and this old entitled Karen trying to lie and say that I attacked her first. Here's what happened. Okay, so I had a buddy who used to work with an armored cash transportation service. If you don't know, there are various types of these services, but for the most part, they transport large sums of cash to and from banks and businesses. They generally are paid to safely and securely transfer funds, as well as carry a form of personal protection, if you know what I mean. Now, the obvious reasons for this are because their vehicles may be a high-value target, meaning that they take safety very seriously and have protocols for protecting each other. This service in particular did ATM refills, as in they would go to the ATMs, check their cash level, and refill if necessary. Now, for some very important context reasons, my friend is a very large guy. He's an amateur boxing and MMA type of guy, so he is perfect for this line of work. Basically, nobody wants to mess with him. One day, he's doing an ATM refill at a gas station, and he recalls this 70-year-old looking woman coming through the door out of his peripheral vision. So why would he think anything of it? He's busy stocking cash into the machine, and while he's finishing up, he feels a poke in his back, and an older, gruff woman's voice says,
"Give me all the cash in a bag. This is a stick-up."
My friend said he thought he felt time freeze. He had been trained on these things, but everything goes so quickly, with his adrenaline pumping so fast. He whips around fast, grabs a robber by the wrist to try and disarm them, and does a throw to bring this person to the ground. But only then does he realize in his shock that this was an old woman. She looked like any other sweet old grandma out there, and he had her wrist in his hand while she was on the floor, absolutely screaming. He let go immediately, she's screaming for the police to get called, and he takes a step back and tries to take in the whole situation. The woman is helped up, but she's holding her wrist, and she immediately says what was going on as if she was in the right.
"It was a joke. My God, can't you take a joke? I'm just an old woman. I couldn't rob you. I just wanted to wait to use the machine."
My friend said he was just collecting himself and felt his adrenaline coming down when he heard what she said, and immediately he felt his blood rising and the adrenaline pumping back up. He said to her, "Oh my God, are you serious? You cannot joke about that stuff. You absolute moron. I'm an armored truck employee. Are you kidding me?" Now, the cops were called, and the original call that sent them in was that an old woman had just been attacked in a gas station, so the police came in and were immediately looking for somebody who heard a sweet old lady. No one had really seen what happened because everyone was doing their own thing, but this entitled Karen is just telling everyone now how she didn't do anything wrong and how she was brutally thrown to the ground by this huge brute. This entitled old Karen is now talking to the police, holding on to her wrist and head, and crying while she talked to the police, and they questioned my friend. At this point, my friend is absolutely losing it. He thinks he's gonna get framed hard for this, and the police are just telling him that from her side of the story, she was the one who got assaulted by him. He calmly tells them his side of the story, and while he's talking, he realizes that there's a security camera pointing directly at the ATM. He points to that and almost begs and pleads the cops to please check the cameras. Well, they watch the camera footage, and while it was in low quality and grainy, you see this entitled old Karen clearly pointing a finger right into his back, which is in the same fashion of an old school mock robbery style. Now, the cops were dumbfounded on why they thought someone would think that this was a joke. They go back inside to question her, and she brings up that it was just a joke. She says to them,
"I'm just an old woman though. How on earth could I rob anyone? You would think that someone could handle a bit of humor. Must just be these newer generations being too soft."
My friend commented how she was just so blindly adamant that this was just a joke, and she was wrong for just a little bit of horseplay, as she called it. But he almost lost his mind when she heard her bring up the newer generation bit. An ambulance came and picked her up, and she had a sprained wrist and some bruising on her back, and she claimed she needed physical therapy, which my friend's company legitimately believes she probably needed, as she was in her 60s, and that throw to the ground was probably really rough. So right then and there, it ended up being no charges against my friend, nor did the entitled Karen get anything, though an investigation was launched into it. And I would probably assume that they wouldn't want to pursue charges against an old woman who was literally judo thrown onto the ground, which probably would be hard to make a convincing case to a jury of that. She did, however, attempt to sue the armored truck service for the injuries, and they were considering settling, but apparently the owner was so upset about the interaction that they decided to play it out in court. While I don't know all the details from that part, my friend did tell me that the case was dismissed and they didn't owe her a single dime. To this day, my friend said it was one of the scariest moments of his life because at first he thought he was going to get robbed. And then shortly after, it was scary because he thought he was going to jail for attacking an elderly woman. He thinks about how it could have played out differently depending on the person loading the ATM, and that this entitled Karen should be counting her lucky stars that she is even still alive. Wow, that lady's an idiot. And in my opinion, she got exactly what she deserved. Who in their right mind would go up to an armored car and be like, oh, give me all your money, this is a robbery, and then somehow not expect them to respond with like violence of some kind? Like, that is seriously a dumb idea, and she absolutely deserved to get judo flipped in the way that she did. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. My entitled neighbor is parking her car in such a way where she is literally blocking my access to my unit. And despite talking to her several times to try and find some kind of middle ground, she simply refuses to move her car. And at this point, I'm considering having her car towed or going to other extreme measures just to try and get this lady off my back. Because right now, I'm very frustrated. And at this point, I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. So I live in a mother-in-law unit that's right across from another mother-in-law unit, and we're connected by a carport between us. The carport has her front door directly off of it, and my patio gate off of it, which leads to my front door. So this really is my only access to my unit at all. The unit access and the carport are off an alley along the side of the main house our units are built off of. This alley runs from our street to the block over, and it's a little passing way that other units for other houses can use for access. The first few weeks I was here, I noticed that she parks really crooked in the carport. My mother uses a cane, and when she visited, she struggled to get into my gate from the parking. During my lunch breaks, I would come home and do a chore or two just for 30 minutes and then leave. Now, I will park my car along her unit, leaving her carport driveway open to back out and reverse out of the alleyway. When I leave, I reverse out and join the main street. Now, my lease specifically states I can use the alleyway, and I've only been here for maybe about a month. Recently, she has been texting me to not block her in. Where I park though, there's literally 2 to 4 feet of space before her car is even in the way. I mean, I'm literally nowhere near it. I've explained my lunch breaks to her, but she just says, I'm always running late, so I can't ask you to move, so just stay away from there, period. But I seriously find this unreasonable. Your lack of preparation does not constitute an emergency on my part after all. But I explain my lunch breaks. It's not long, and my lease says that I can use the alley, but I will be mindful to stay out of her way. Fast forward to today, and I'm home maybe 10 minutes before I get a text message claiming that I'm blocking her in because she needs that spot that I'm in to back out, and I'm just in the way. Now at this point, I'm irritated. I walk out and I say that you have plenty of space to back out, so I don't understand what your issue is. She yells at me that there's not, and that she doesn't want to hit my car. I reply that there is enough space to back out of the alleyway. I continue to one-handed back my car out of the alley into the main road, and I decide to park on the curb. I watch her struggle to back out and then pull forward to leave. For reference, I drive a Honda CR-V, and she drives a small car. She's gone for the rest of the day, and when she comes home, she parks so diagonally, she left me maybe 1.5 feet of space to enter and exit my unit. And I'm seriously so irritated by this. My lease clearly states that I can use the alleyway, and I've told her this so many times. I also give her 4 feet of space so that she can reverse out of the alley. Just because she doesn't want to, or is just too stupid to figure it out, doesn't mean that she's trapped in there. With the way that she parked, I will be guaranteed to bump into her car and potentially scratch it up. I looked up regulations, and she's not allowed to impede access to my unit. I mean, what is the point of her acting like this? I just moved in here, and I don't talk to anyone. I just want to do some chores on my lunch breaks, just so I don't have to be exhausted after 9 hours and then do the chores. I don't know what else to do other than document, tell the landlord, and eventually have her car towed if I can't reach my unit. So would I be overreacting if I did any of this to my neighbor? Because right now, I'm so frustrated that I just don't know what to do. Wow, your neighbor is super toxic. Also, they suck at driving, and that is not your problem. First and foremost, it's time to get petty and nasty with this lady. In my opinion, you need to set up some kind of camera system, or if you're not able to do that, I would start taking pictures of where you're parking, showing clearly how much space you're leaving her so that she can back out, as well as what she's doing in the carport itself. Like, she's literally blocking the way so you can go home. This is across the board not okay, and for her to act like this is completely unreasonable. You just want to go home and do chores on your lunch break. And you know what? If I live closer to home, I would absolutely do the same on my lunch break too. And you have every right to. Your lease literally says, yes, you can use this alleyway, but she's sitting there trying to be like, just stay out of my way. Just don't don't even go near it, period. Like, this lady does not rule this alleyway, and she's only upset because you're probably the first person to fight back on what she's saying. She was probably so used to telling off the previous tenant that now she has somebody who's not gonna listen, and it now seems like she's almost doing this on purpose just to try and like get under your skin. That, in my opinion, is super toxic, and you do not deserve that in the slightest. And you know what? If the landlord doesn't do anything, and if the documentation doesn't prove how she's parking, as well as how much room you're giving her on the way out, then and only then at that point, I would definitely start towing her car. If she wants to play stupid games, then she can absolutely win stupid prizes. And her blocking your access to your own house, in my opinion, is completely unacceptable. An entitled neighbor hates the fact that I told on him to the city code enforcement team, as I exposed him for having a fire hazard in his backyard that could cause a massive problem for everybody involved. And now, as a result, he's begun to say all these terrible things about me and has put my reputation on the line, where I had no choice but to fight back. Here's what happened. So I had an issue with the people renting the house next door. They were trying to tell me that I couldn't trim their tree that was hanging over their property line. I hired an arborist who received permission from their property management company, and he trimmed all the branches that were coming across the property line. He did check to see if the property management company wanted to pay half to trim the whole tree, but they declined. So the neighbors and I had the tree issue. And during that dust-up, the husband actually told me that he doesn't care about our HOA rules. Now, when their backyard became a fire hazard, as it was filled with nearly 6-foot tall weeds that were dead in color, I ended up snitching to the city code enforcement, especially after one of my security camera installers saw their back lawn climbing a ladder to install one of my AI Pro cameras. The installer said something to me about the lawn and was like, what is going on? My friends on the internet and the Nextdoor application told me that as the 4th of July approaches in California, one rogue firework could set it all on fire, meaning that my house and my newly shared fence with them would go up in flames. And the neighbor behind them had purchased new shared fencing too. So you know what? I'm glad I snitched on them. The family was cited by the city, and the husband bangs on my door and rings the doorbell a week later. He's filming the interaction on his phone, probably just to protect himself. Now, I didn't answer my door because I never answer it, and I could hear him calling me a piece of garbage to the neighbor next door for reporting him via my doorbell camera. He tells the neighbor that I chopped down his tree and a few other things, with the neighbor telling him that he needs to be more careful and come and talk to him. Now, my buddy at the police department said not to engage with this guy, but around 2 weeks later, I see the husband outside on video camera trying to grab his trash can and dart into the house. I tried yelling at him last week, but he acted like he didn't hear me. I then run outside and I tell him to please knock on my door now. I was wrapping up my hands and I told him that you were talking trash earlier, so please just try and hit the repeat button. I yelled at him from my property to never knock on my door ever again, and that if he does, he is going to mess around and find out very quickly. And as I was returning to my garage, this guy called me a hillbilly. He filmed the whole interaction, and so did my security cameras, and I made sure not to threaten him or get in his face. I remained on my property just so I could send him a message. The neighbor waits to go inside, and then he walks along the sidewalk in front of my house to talk with the neighbor he had called me a piece of garbage to a few weeks earlier. It's then that I hear him discussing potentially talking to a lawyer. The neighbor then said that I had my gloves waiting for him, so they suggested that they avoid me and stay inside their fence. Now, I grew up in Gary, Indiana, which is right next door to Chicago. I got into a lot of fights growing up because that was life until we moved to a military base in Texas. And I learned that I didn't need to fight anymore, despite being in the Air Force for 22 years and serving and retiring. But regardless, that side of me from Gary still exists. And that's despite the fact that I never raised a fist to anybody in the military. The level of disrespect by this neighbor was unbearable in our beautiful HOA. But on the bright side, they will be forced to move out in 2 months, which all comes down to the fact that they can't afford the rent or the utilities. And in my opinion, I seriously cannot wait for them to finally leave. It is so funny to me that this entitled neighbor has the audacity to try and talk garbage about you behind your back, but the second you're like, oh, come on, let's hit the reset button, say that again to my face, they go running back to their property line and are like, oh yeah, you're just a hillbilly. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? This guy's backyard is a literal fire hazard. And from the sounds of it, living in California is like the one place you don't want to have that, because the original poster is right. That could have gone up in flames and really ruined a lot of personal property. So seriously, good for you for putting this guy in his place, because in my opinion, he absolutely had it coming. An entitled old jerk says that he's going to destroy me on social media, all because his offer on a house wasn't accepted. And despite the fact that I tried to discuss his options on getting things taken care of, this entitled jerk was refusing to hear me out, claiming instead that he was going to ruin my life. Here's what happened. Okay, for starters, I'm a real estate agent, and one day I received a lead from someone out of state who wanted to relocate to my city. We did a Zoom meeting, and he and his wife seemed very nice. After our meeting, he asked me to book 8 to 10 homes, as he was planning on coming out here in the next week. Now, this was fine, as I had plenty of availability for his visit. Well, this entitled jerk shows up with his buddy at a home just outside of town. My first clue that he was going to be a problem was when he and his buddy refused to wear masks to the seller's home. This was back in 2021, so COVID was still a big deal, and sellers did not want people in their homes without a mask on. The entitled jerk's friend says to me, "Oh, I don't need no mask because I'm retired." But I did not glorify that stupid statement with a response. They were also annoyed about taking their shoes off in the house, and this annoying friend eventually goes and just gets some plastic bags to put over their shoes. We are in the house for about 20 minutes when he decided that he didn't want to see anything else, even though I had already booked a bunch of houses and blocked off my day just for him. He then told me to write up the offer, which I thought that it was really stupid to fly all this way and make a decision without seeing the other homes. Anyways, I wrote the offer, but it was contingent on him selling his house in the other state. The sellers rejected the offer since he didn't even have his house ready to list or even sell. I called him after he had flown home, and I delivered the bad news and explained their reasoning. Well, immediately he got very angry and started telling me that this area was a piece of garbage with ugly homes. He claimed that I misled him about the area, as there had been a methanol plant proposed but canceled a few miles from the house. It was like he thought I was trying to sell him a house in some toxic hazard site, which really was far from the case. I let him vent for a few minutes as I kept my cool, and his wife then jumps in on the call and basically parroted everything that he said. Then they eventually hung up on me. He then calls back a few minutes later even angrier, and just keeps going on, and at some point I lost a bit of my cool and I decided to hang up on him. The very next day, he starts texting me demanding an apology, and that if I don't apologize, even though I had nothing to apologize for, he was going to destroy me on social media. He also kept saying to me, "Boy, you've done it this time," while also saying other awful remarks. I asked my managing broker to call him and deal with the situation. That phone call was pretty useless, and the guy kept calling and texting me. The managing broker then actually calls me, and he asked me, "Well, how could you have handled this better?" And yes, as you can probably guess, the managing broker really sucked. I ended up blocking the guy, and his looming statement that he was going to destroy me on social media went literally nowhere. Last I checked, he moved to Texas, which was wonderful news to me and a blessing for my entire state. He also called the listing agent and screamed at her. Now, when I called him that night, I explained to him that he could submit the offer again in a few days if he could just hurry up and list his house. That's all the sellers want to see. This home purchase could have worked out if he had just gotten his house listed as soon as possible. But no, he had to act like an entitled jerk with a behavior that I'd expect to see from a child, and not something that I would ever see from a 60-year-old man. Wow, that guy's a massive jerk. He literally was going to be like, "Oh, I'm going to destroy you on social media." But it's like, wait a second, I didn't do anything. You're literally trying to get me canceled and get me in trouble for something that you didn't do. Because from the sounds of it, if they literally just like, I don't know, listed their house when they were supposed to, all of this could have been avoided altogether. It literally could have been taken care of right then and there, but this guy wanted to be stubborn and be some massive jerk. So good for the original poster for standing their ground and refusing to take this sitting down, because this entitled jerk absolutely deserved to be put in their place. An entitled Karen demands that I turn down a full scholarship to Yale simply because she thinks that I'm going to be indoctrinated in some kind of way. Here's what happened. Okay, for starters, I'm an 18-year-old male, and I got very lucky as I was accepted to Yale with a full scholarship for undergrad, which is where I'll be going in the fall. I also work part-time as a cashier at my local Publix, which is a popular supermarket in the South. I've had my fair share of interesting people come through my line, but this was the most interesting encounter I've had in a while. It was late in the evening, and this entitled Karen comes through my line, being as polite as she possibly could be at first. And she was polite all the way up until she noticed my apron. For reference, cashiers at Publix have to wear aprons, so I had affixed to mine the letter Y on my apron to show some of my school pride. My store is also right near a college, so the students who attend that college will wear pins to show their school pride, hence why I wore a Yale pin. The lady notices the pin as I'm ringing her up and asks me what it's for, and if that's for some trade school or some community college. But it's then that I tell her that I'll be going to Yale in the fall for a full scholarship. Immediately, her demeanor changes, and she loudly proclaims that I made a terrible choice and that I'm going to be indoctrinated. But indoctrinated indoctrinated into what? Like seriously, who knows what she's talking about? She also proclaimed that she is part of the greatest generation because she was not indoctrinated. After I gave her the receipt, she ended with a stern warning not to get involved with any satanic rituals and that she was looking out for me, a random cashier that she just met. But needless to say, I will be respectfully declining to heed her advice. And funny enough, that was the third person to say something along those lines that I literally should turn down going to Yale or else I was going to be indoctrinated. And I'm honestly just so done with entitled jerks who act this way. Wow, imagine getting into like a really prestigious college only to then have a bunch of jerks be like, no, don't do it, you're gonna get indoctrinated. And then they don't even like try to explain to you what in the world that means. Like that is literally the most useless thing anyone could possibly say to you because they're just gonna walk up and be like, oh, you're gonna be indoctrinated, okay, gotta go, see you later, instead of like explaining their opinion and being like, this is why. But even then, I guarantee you they didn't have any good reasons behind it. So yeah, that entitled Karen was completely out of line because I'm sure that your experience at Yale is gonna be fantastic. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.